Travis Wayne Goodsell. Being born and raised Mormon of the Brighamite faith, I've been raised up to be informed that I must believe that the Brighamite Salt Lake City, Utah-based church is the only true church on the face of the earth, and that we are successors of Joseph Smith. And all of our manuals I can't say our scriptures because there's some contradictions in it, but that's what we're talking about today. But we are told by all the prophets and church leaders and teachers, everything is designed to tell us we are the true successors of Joseph Smith. We are the true church. And so when we go around the world, we put forth Joseph Smith as our discussion topic. We don't put current prophets. We don't put Brigham Young or any of the other successors to Brigham Young. We focus on Joseph Smith. This year was supposed to be all about the bicentennial year of the first vision. As we go around the world presenting the Book of Mormon and saying Joseph Smith saw Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ as physical beings, separate personages, and he organized his church because Jesus Christ himself said that all the other Christian churches are an abomination in his sight. And so we don't get informed about Joseph Smith joining the Methodist Church after that event, nor do we find out that his mother and siblings did not join the Presbyterian Church, etc., etc. They don't tell us much of church history. There are many gaps and questions that remain, but the church just carries on. This is the way it is, everything is fine, nothing to see here, don't see anything else but what we give you to see and read, ponder, and pray about. And now that we are in a digital age, any Mormon can go to the internet and type in Succession Crisis Latter-day Saints for Wikipedia. And if you think that this is fake news and anti-Mormon, well, the church helps to suppress the information on here. So Mormons should feel safe and confident that nothing that the church doesn't want will not be put on here. But there's a deception in this that I'm going to point out to you, is that when you're investigating whether the church is true, you have to factor in the succession after Joseph Smith. Because if you just focus on whether Joseph Smith is true, you may come to find out, oh, yeah, he is. Good guy, preaches good things, etc. But he was assassinated. And that's where the church deceives us, is because Joseph Smith set up a pattern or process for his succession, and nobody followed it when he was assassinated. That's the succession crisis, and they don't talk about it here. See, it says The succession crisis in the Latter-day Saint movement occurred after the death of Joseph Smith. Death is an incorrect term. He was assassinated. They should have put the assassination of Joseph Smith, because that says, oh, well, he died of old age. You know, any type of death can be inserted by anybody reading this. If you don't know that Joseph Smith was assassinated, when you read Death of Joseph Smith, you go, oh, okay, he died, and was dumb and didn't provide a way to succeed him. No, he was assassinated. This needs to be understood. The movement's founder on 27 June 1844. For roughly 6 months after Joseph Smith's, again, death, assassination, several people competed to take over his role, his office, his leadership position. See here, notice how it's worded. Competed. As we are taught in this current church here in Salt Lake City, Utah, because there are other branch offs, which is why I need to specify in this video. We are taught that the president of the Quorum of the 12 automatically succeeds the death of a president of the church. So when Monson died, under the sign of Revelation chapter 12 of the stars falling from the tail of the dragon, Russell M. Nelson assumed the throne, as Packer had died under the Blood Moon Tetrad back in 2014-2015. And so as Mormons, we are blinded to what should have taken place. And the church deceives us into thinking that, hey, they're the true church. And then Nelson gets up in his solemn assembly that they are the true successors of Brigham Young. And, wait a minute, you mean Joseph Smith? He said Brigham Young. Oops. And nobody knows to know. And so you don't investigate what you don't know to know. And only those who are not Mormon, who have missionaries knocking on the door, hey, we're from the church, join us and give us money. People then have access now to do research on the church. And there are those who have. It's Me, Jesse, for example, did a whole video channel on YouTube based upon her researching of the church after the missionaries had knocked on her door one day. She let them in, she talked about the Book of Mormon and Jesus with them, and so then she decided to start doing some research and started realizing, uh-oh, there's some problems that I need to investigate, because I'm not going to go join in some church when these problems exist. And the church historically, before Google search and the internet, were suppressing that information, keeping publications out of the knowledge of people's understanding. Even though those books were in and of themselves hearsay material. Yes, I'm talking to you, Fawn Brody and Rough Stone Rolling author, and Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. So, until somebody actually does real research to investigate the truth about what happened, people are left in the dark. And so, to know that the church is true is one thing. to do your research on that, to find out which is the true successive church, if any, is another. And Mormons and everybody else don't do that. Because, remember what we tell people on our missions, Mormons, or former Mormons. We tell them that Christ's church, with the 12 apostles, they were all murdered. See? They didn't die. They were murdered. All Christians know that much. And so we tell people, after they were murdered, nobody replaced them. And we can go and talk from the scriptures about how Matthias and Barabbas was the guy who replaced Jesus in being set free. Barnabas, I think, is the competitor for the throne of the 12. The duel to the death. But that's it. There was just the replacement of Judas. Then we find out they all died. And we tell people that the authority to run God's church died with them. Not correct. It was James, the brother of Jesus, who had the authority to run the church. Acts chapter 15. He's the one who gets the last word over Peter, even. The person who gets the last word, he's the one in charge. And so, everybody misses that part. But, the current church here in Utah has fooled and deceived us into thinking that the office of Moses for the first presidency only requires the keys of Peter, James, and John. And when you understand who Brigham Young was and what his position was in Joseph's church, then you go, oh yeah, okay, now I see what he did. He exalted himself beyond what he was. And Mormons don't know to know, and so don't investigate to figure it out and go, hey, wait a minute. And as Mormons, we don't ever think Emma didn't go with Brigham. Well, isn't Brigham the true successor? Why didn't Emma go with Brigham? Why does she hate him? Brigham Young said he and Joseph were best of buddies. What's going on? What happened to the other Smith brothers who didn't die? Only Hiram was the brother who was assassinated with Joseph. What happened to Samuel? What happened to William? What happened to others? What about Joseph's sons? We don't get told. What about Sidney Rigdon? Sidney Rigdon didn't go with Brigham? What's going on? We don't get told. And we don't know to do the research, to find out what happened. And so, these several people involved, Sidney Rigdon, Brigham Young, and they throw in James Strang, but he was not in that conference in August. In August of 1844, so Joseph is assassinated on the 27th of June. So then July, people are called back from wherever their missions are, and so in August they held a a general conference, an emergency general conference. And only Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon and Lucy Mack, the mother of Joseph Smith and Hiram, spake at that conference. And this is where I get information from seminary and institute that when Brigham Young was speaking to the Mormons testified that they saw Brigham transformed into Joseph Smith, and they heard his voice as they see Brigham Young looking and talking like Joseph Smith, and therefore they knew that Brigham was the true successor. Is that how it's supposed to be done? Is that how Joseph Smith set it up? See, these are things that people need to check. Is that our doctrine? That Joseph Smith, as a deceased spirit separated from his body, can then possess his true successor? Is that how it's done? I thought it was the president of the Quorum of the 12. Why are people saying that it's this other process? And nobody thinks to check. And the James Strang did his own thing. He came out, claimed he had a signed letter from Joseph Smith that stated that he's supposed to lead the church after his death. And James Strang went one step further. He created on plates a scribbled language that he claimed was ancient, and he even provided the translation so that he can not only show his plates that he made, but also the translation that he made of those scribblings. And people followed him. Prominent people followed him. William Smith was one of those who followed him. And they went to an island out off Michigan, out into one of those seas. And when he was there, he then decided, hey guys, let's practice polygamy. Well, he was then assassinated, and nobody knows who did it, other than his dead body was found. And everybody just left his organization and did their own thing. And so, yeah, we don't know who murdered him. But we do know that those prominent people under Joseph Smith were not practicing polygamy. These are other things that are necessary to distinguish, because the Brighamite branch-off claims that Joseph Smith did and said lots of things that we don't have record of, but that were done in secret so that Brigham Young can then justify doing them himself. Polygamy being one of them. Magic underwear is another. Temple endowment ceremony is another. And Adam as Heavenly Father is another. And so on and so on. And Mormons don't think. When you have President Kimball and then Hinckley coming out in conference denouncing Brigham Young's Adam as Heavenly Father. Wait a minute. Are successive presidents of the church allowed to take the church in a whole new different religion? Because Brigham Young did, even though he claimed it was what Joseph Smith was talking about. But then Kimball and Hinckley denounced Brigham Young's religion. The church denounced Brigham Young's religion because the United States ordered them to. And so the church, after being disincorporated by the United States, were reincorporated in 1923. That's our current church here in Salt Lake City, Utah, headquarters at Temple Square. It is not the Church of Brigham Young. It is not the Church of Joseph Smith. And so then the question becomes, is it the true Church of God even? If it's not Joseph's church, which we all preach and pronounce to the world is the true church of God, but then Brigham Young isn't, but then now the current church is, that came from Brigham Young, how does that work again? Where in Scripture is that setup for process for succession established? See, all these things we don't think to think about. We don't know to know. And so there were a list of others here who were theoretical successors, as they label them, and then they have immediate successors, and then campaigning after the assassination of Joseph Smith. August 8th, 1844 was that conference. And then the organization after the conference, the claims of James J. Strang, or Strange. There's no E at the end, so I keep calling him Strang. Sidney Rigdon and the Church of Jesus Christ, which was interesting because Joseph Smith, the original title of the church was the Church of Christ. And so Sidney calls his branch off the Church of Jesus Christ. Brigham Young changes it to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so again, as Mormons, we don't know to know. Emma, when her son was old enough, had her son create the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, patterned after Brigham Young's revisionist title. And so the big question is that nobody is checking out, nobody is bothering to look for, is what Joseph Smith himself set up as the process to succeed him. And all Mormons don't understand, as they get confused in all the general conferences where we sustain with a vote, which is not a vote, it's just a loyalty oath raising of our right hand, the president of the church. So in section 107, he talks about the offices of the Aaronic and the Melchizedek priesthood. In verse 21, he talks about the organizations. Of necessity, there are presidents or presiding officers growing out of or appointed of or from among those who are ordained to the several offices in these two priesthoods. And so in the Aaronic priesthood, we have deacons, teachers, and priests in the Brighamite version. And so they're supposed to be presidents, growing out of, appointed of, or from among. That's a vote. So the deacons, and there's only supposed to be 12 max deacons in a ward, those 12 deacons are supposed to hold a vote as to who among them are supposed to be the president and the 2 counselors of the deacons' quorum. Yeah, we've never practiced that in the church. But what's interesting is Brigham Young did. He was in the traveling missionary 12. And there was an incident in which Thomas B. Marsh, who was the president, wanted nothing more to do with the church. And he left. And so the remaining 12, which William also was booted out, held a vote, and they voted for Brigham Young to be the president of that 12. That's how Brigham Young became the president of the missionary 12 apostles under Joseph Smith. He was following section 107, verse 21. But then Joseph dies, and they don't do it for the president of the church. But the president of the church is in verse 22, because his is different. Of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests, chosen. What does it mean to be chosen? Voted by the body. The body? Well, it's not the 3 presiding high priests. We have to then go back to the proper noun Melchizedek priesthood. The Melchizedek priesthood. It doesn't say the high priests. Because there's elders, there's 70, there's apostles, there's the 12 apostles. Oh, see the difference? There's the 70, there's the stake 70, etc., etc. That's all in the Brighamite church. And Joseph's church had some differences, as we no longer have apostles. We have the 12 apostles, but we don't have apostles anymore. Appointed and ordained to that office, and upheld by the confidence, faith, and prayer of the church. There's the difference. The Melchizedek priesthood are supposed to gather in a big Melchizedek priesthood meeting upon the death of the president of the church, who, Joseph Smith, was the first to be assassinated. Thus, a need for a successor. The Melchizedek priesthood. Remember that Adamon Diamond thing that gets talked about in mythological form? That is supposed to happen right before the millennium, when Jesus comes down from outer space to Adamon Diamond, and he's given all the keys all the way back to Adam, as all of those dead spirits also show up at that big meeting. Well, that's patterned after verse 22 here. And it's wrong. But the process isn't. And so, yeah, when Joseph Smith died, there was supposed to be a priesthood meeting. But instead, they held a general conference on August 8, 1844, and only had 2 people for Mormons to choose from. And in the end, people just went with whoever they chose to go with. And so the Succession Crisis Wikipedia page says the majority went with Brigham Young. Oh, are you pulling an ad populum fallacy argument? Well, the majority went, therefore he's the true successor. Is that how it's done in the church? No, I just read to you how it was supposed to be done. We have all of these fallacies and contradictions, self-contradictions of how things are supposed to be done, and we don't bother to actually find out how it was supposed to be done. And when we read it, it confuses us, but we just assume, oh, I guess the current process is, and the president of the church can change things, and huh? No. General Conference is when the chosen by the Melchizedek priesthood new successors, because they don't choose just the president, they choose the whole first presidency. And then when you look back in history, well, now you understand. Sidney and Brigham were the top guys. So it would have been a vote by the Melchizedek priesthood. Brigham may not have been the winner. And if he was the winner, Sidney Rigdon might end up being his counselor. They don't like each other. Sidney Rigdon was in from the beginning. Brigham Young was not. Joseph Smith called Brigham in 1839 Judas for what he did in exalting himself, and uses that word to replace Thomas B. Marsh, whom Joseph Smith called a good man. And so, yeah, Sidney Rigdon knew what Brigham Young was up to also and didn't like him. That's why Emma didn't like him. And so what should have happened on August 8th, 1844, should have been a priesthood meeting for the Melchizedek priesthood holders to hold a vote. And it should have been Sidney Rigdon talking to the priesthood. It should have been Brigham Young talking to the priesthood. It should have been William Smith talking to the priesthood. It should have been James J. Strang talking to the priesthood. Could have even been David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery, though they left back in 1838. Alpheus Cutler and others of the administrative quorum of 12. Huh? Exactly. Joseph Smith's organization was different than what we currently have in the Brighamite branch. There were all these candidates should have been allowed to speak at this great priesthood meeting. And it's not even necessary that they speak, because there's nothing here that says that people who want to be the president get to speak to campaign. It just says the Melchizedek priesthood vote. And so it could be the silent guy who sits in the back. Doesn't matter. As long as the Melchizedek priesthood vote and the person gets the majority votes, he becomes the president. And then they vote for the first counselor and the second counselor, and thus forms the presiding high priest, quorum of the presidency of the church. That's how it's supposed to be done. There is no other process that Joseph Smith set up, even though people claim that he did. And what does that mean now? If nobody followed Joseph Smith's instructions for succeeding him, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. And we tell Christians when we're on our missions, trying to tell them that Joseph Smith is the true successor. The church fell into apostasy with the deaths of Jesus and the 12. And then we have to include James, the brother of Jesus. The church fell into apostasy in these latter days upon the assassination of Joseph Smith, because the Melchizedek priesthood failed to obey the rules that Joseph Smith set up for his succession. So what does that mean? If this church isn't true, but they're claiming truth from the original church of Joseph, but they're not doing anything that he did and taught and preached and practiced and was trying to work towards, one of which was to build Zion before the Christ comes. And yet the church has no interest in going to Zion to return to Missouri or anywhere to build Zion. This is it. It's here. Temple Square. That's the headquarters. There will be no other headquarters. They even created their own prophecy that Joseph Smith supposedly gave, that they were supposed to move to the Rocky Mountains to build Zion. So how do we get the church back? Do we just take the apostate Melchizedek priesthood holders and have a meeting again? And they get to choose? I mean, the majority are Brighamite successors. They're going to keep Nelson as the president. And so, yeah, how is it supposed to be done? Well, I wonder if there's something in the scriptures that gives us instruction of how God himself does it. Well, let's see. Let's start with Genesis and we'll read all the way through. And days later, when I finally get to Numbers chapter 12, verse 6, we'll know the answer. And he said, now this is the Lord, came down in a pillar of a cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. Busted. What were they doing? Verse 1, and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses. Sibling rivalry? Because of the Ethiopian woman he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. A little repeat version there. Because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Captain Obvious. And so the Lord himself comes down and says in verse 6, hear now my words. Read my lips. No new taxes. If there be a prophet among you. Now remember Samuel, who was given up by his parents to the temple to Eli to raise. It is said by the author of that text that before time a prophet was called a seer. So keep that in mind. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him. Oh, okay. Like the first vision. Huh. In a vision. Oh, well, what do you know? And will speak unto him in a dream. Lehi has a dream. Nephi has dream, and in which they knew and were speaking to the Lord. That is the process. That is the procedure when there is apostasy, when there is no priesthood on the earth, when there is no true church of Jesus Christ. Technically just Christ. Joseph Smith called him Ammon, son Ammon specifically, Adamondiammon. And so this comes from the Torah. If you do not understand the ranking of the Torah to the Jews, my goodness, what's wrong with you? This is the book of books. There is no higher authority for the Jews. So for the Jews, that is the process for their Messiah, whom they're waiting for the last days. 1 Nephi chapter 1 verse 2. The learning of the Jews. That is Mormonism. The Jewish Christ also is not the Christian Christ. He is not the Mormon Christian hybrid Christ either. He's a mortal man. And so Joseph Smith also, in section 103 verse 16, says that a Mormon from the apostate church will be raised up to lead Mormons as Moses led the house of Israel. That's the Mormon Christ of Joseph Smith, after the learning of the Jews. This is who we're waiting for to restore Joseph's church, to establish Zion. So that wickedness will end and the millennial reign of peace begins. And all because of the succession crisis. Dum dum dum.